party we go to together, she teased him. He shrugged. Hey, not my fault Lila decided to crash the prom, he protested. But you had to call them losers, she pointed out. He smirked. Takes one to know one, he pointed out with a grin. She shivered and he immediately stripped off his tux, draping it chivalrously round her shoulders and pulling her close. Shall we go home, milady, he asked her gently. She leaned against him, her hand finding his, fingers then twining with his, and she sighed happily. There's no one I'd rather go home with, she grinned as they headed down the road, heading along the familiar route home. Chapter 91, Demons. Chapter text. The gym didn't burn down, but the cops were called and the meathead intruders were arrested, along with Tough Nut, who stole a cop's cap and ran off round the school grounds with it. The gang all caught up at Astrid's the next afternoon, the boys looking the worse for wear with various bruises and black eyes. But Fishlegs was astonishingly philosophical. You should have seen the other guys. No, seriously, he told Astrid and Hiccup, who were snuggled on the couch, Astrid sitting on Hiccup's lap. Half the year attacked them, including Roland. Boy, he can punch when he's mad. Who knew? Irette murmured, sitting back and allowing his eyes to drift to Tough. Hiccup wrapped his arm around Astrid. Yeah, people never stop surprising you, right, he added. Astrid snuggled back against him. And you pulled the fire alarm, she grinned. The gym was on fire. Yeah. Tough grinned. My bad. Astrid and Hiccup shared a look. You were right, milady, he murmured. Thorsten's. Then Ingrid walked in, the phone in her hand. Sorry to break this up, guys, but I've a call for Hiccup. She boy's green eyes widened. Emmy, he said, his face suddenly uncertain. He accepted the phone and gulped. Hello. Hiccup. It's Malatiden here. The judge just called me. A case has just been withdrawn from court and the case starts tomorrow. The case? You mean? His face blanched. Alvin Treacher's trial, she confirmed. It's not ideal. Can I come round to see you in an hour? I need to talk you through what will be happening. Sure, you know the address, he said faintly and then nodded. Okay, see you then. He handed the phone back to Ingrid. What is it, babe? You look like you've seen a ghost. Astrid asked, rising to stand by him. He nodded. Al's trial has been moved up. Starts tomorrow, he said tonelessly. Heather glanced at Astrid and nudged Fishlegs. It's time we were going anyway, she said. I know the Mala will contact us when she needs us, won't she? Astrid nodded and murmured a few goodbyes. Hiccup forced himself to smile and nod as they left, but Astrid grasped his hands and stared into his ashen face. You okay? She asked, and he stared into her face, then shook his head. Not right now, not facing him, he admitted. Mrs. H. the Mala is coming here to talk to me. Is that okay? I, can't really see her in my bedroom. Use my study, Martin offered. Hiccup stared at him and then nodded. Thanks, Mr. H, he said quietly. Promise not to break anything. Martin patted his shoulder. I know you won't, or I'll set my daughter on you. Malatiden arrived an hour later as promised, dressed in a dark suit even on Sunday, and followed Hiccup into the study. Astrid watched the door close and looked at her parents. They looked as concerned as she felt. He's not okay, she murmured, feeling her mother wrap an arm around her and hug her. Martin stared thoughtfully at the door. It's likely he'll have to relive a lot of the abuse during the trial, he murmured. I doubt Treacher will go down without a fight. And he's done a lot of damage to that boy. Then he turned to his daughter. And that damage lasts, Astrid. Just be careful. He may have anger and trust issues. She sighed. He does, she admitted. And he recognizes it as well. He doesn't want to be what Alvin made him. And he does want to be with me. I trust him, Dad. Be patient with him, Ingrid added. Now come and help me make the dinner. Martin stared at his wife and then his daughter and rolled his eyes. Really? Are you trying to kill me? He asked as wife and daughter both huffed at him. I may go and join Toothless and Stormfly in the doghouse, he muttered. Oh. It was almost 2 hours later when they left, declining a cup of coffee and smiling in apology for the disturbance of their Sunday. But Hiccup remained sitting in the study, his face expressionless and eyes glazed, and Astrid glanced at her parents, then walked calmly into the study and perched on the desk by the boy. "Hiccup?" she asked. He swallowed slowly, then blinked, focusing on her. "Astrid." The word was toneless. "What did she say?" the girl asked gently. His hand cautiously curled around hers, warm fingers gently stroking her skin. "He'll make me go through everything," he said hollowly. "He'll paint me as a troublemaker and a violent hooligan. He'll play on his position in the community and lack of witnesses. But there is the video from the crematorium and all those witnesses, and Cammy saw me come back bleeding, but not who did it." Hiccup groaned. Astrid winced, and then a stray memory struck her. "I did," she breathed. "That day Dager and his gang beat you up, the first day you were homeless. He met you at the front of the school." She paused and closed her eyes, seeing the scene, and she shuddered. "He slapped you twice, punched you and kicked you about 3 times before he got into his car and drove away." Hiccup sagged and nodded. "Yeah. Stellar parenting as usual." He took a few breaths. "I'm not sure I can do this, Astrid. I'm not sure I can sit in the stand, with him glaring at me." "So you want him to win?" she asked softly. He shook his head and sighed. "No. But I will literally have to go through everything. And losing Mom all over again." She pulled him close and he rested his head against her chest, closing his eyes as she wrapped her arms around him. She tenderly kissed the top of my head. "You know, my bad boy boyfriend wouldn't let Elle best him," she murmured. "He'd do his damnedest to fix him once and for all. He'd smirk and be sarcastic and defiant, and he would make sure that bastard paid for what he did." Hiccup looked up into her eyes, and there was a surge of gratitude and love in his emerald gaze. "I don't deserve you," he said softly. She smiled gently. "Nonsense," she told him. "I'm the lucky one, to have you." Oh. It was worse than anyone expected, for the Burke press were very interested in the case of the respected principal of Burke High, accused of abuse by the school's bad boy. Much was made of his record as an educator, the most successful principal in Burke's history with an unblemished record and excellent testimonies from parents. Hiccup was painted as an ungrateful troublemaker, a deliberate vandal and criminal, almost as if he and his now dead mother deliberately entrapped and abused his trust. He stared at the floor as eyes and lenses focused on him, sitting behind the with Astrid at his side. Martin and Ingrid sat on his other side, with Gobber on the row behind him. Alvin's lawyer played hard on Hiccup's appalling school record, his detentions and repeated suspensions from various subjects, his truancy and defiance. And then he felt Astrid squeeze his hand and lean against him. Defiantly, he lifted his chin and glared at the man. And then the Malatiden stepped up, her cool eyes glittering as she paced slowly across the court. The jury all stared at her intently, wondering what she could say against such a well-respected person. "This case is indeed a tragedy," she said calmly. "But the tragedy of not that Alvin Treacher has been wrongly accused of abusing a young man in his care, no, the tragedy is that this man has misled the people of Burke for so long, when he is an abusive, manipulative, violent and avaricious man who should be kept as far from vulnerable children as possible." There were murmurs in the court. "Hiccup Haddock was a young boy, not even 13 when his family was shattered," she said, walking slowly back and forth. "He lived with his loving parents, an only child. When his father went missing as his plane crashed, he was suddenly left to protect and provide for his ailing mother. Mrs. Valka Haddock had 2 severe disabling and life-limiting conditions which killed her in February this year. Hiccup was charged by his father to protect his mom. But the banks refused to release Mr. Stoic Haddock's estate as there was no body, leaving his wife and son penniless. Valka Haddock was unfit for work and her son was too young, but he tried, working in a local garage to provide some funds and spending all his savings and the money his father had begun to set aside as a college fund to keep the family home and pay for food and heating. But eventually, he had spent every penny they had and they lost their home. Astrid felt him shiver and turned to her, burying his face in her shoulder. She began to understand what he had gone through and her heart shuddered in sorrow for him. By now, Hiccup had started high school and his mom attended the parents' evening, and met the principal, Alvin Treacher. It is certain around this time that their relationship began, and within a month, Valka and her son moved in. Her marriage to Stoic was annulled 2 weeks later on the grounds of abandonment, but as he was only missing, not legally dead, a divorce was issued. Valka married Alvin Trecha a week later. And it is likely that the abuse started not long after, because Hiccup was a boy whose father was missing, presumed dead. He didn't need or want someone stepping into his place. A caring man would accept this, but Alvin Trecha demanded obedience, and enforced his will. She sighed. It is certain over a period of years that Hiccup was physically and emotionally abused and neglected, she told the jury. There were marked changes in his personality and his attainment at school. He entered high school as a straight A student, but he became rebellious and fell in with a bad crowd. He cut classes and truanted. He stopped working. All point to a poor home life, and a responsible and caring teacher would ask why a boy with an exemplary school record, who had maintained that for a year after his father died, suddenly loses his way. But Alvin Trecha didn't, he didn't care. Hiccup was repeatedly suspended and put into detention. Over time, he was penalized in all classes, always the first one to be picked on, always holed up for any transgression when other students were let off with a warning. Hiccup has scars on his body, repeated burns from a cigar on both arms, there are scars across his back from being beaten. He was underweight and dressed in threadbare clothes. He possessed almost nothing: no phone, no computer, no games, just a sketch pad and pencil and a photograph of his parents. There was a lock on the outside of his bedroom door and bars on the window. But he remained at the home because his mother was there, his ailing, vulnerable mother whom he helped with her chores. Who ignored her own son being slapped and beaten before her. He was finally thrown out of his home on the 22nd of October and told not to come back. He was 17 at the time and penniless. This was the principal of the high school throwing a boy out into the cold Burkean night without a place to go. I shall present testimony from doctors who can characterize the abuse, psychologists who can explain the changes in the boy's behavior, witnesses of abuse, and most damning, testimony of Alvin Trecha's behavior at his wife's funeral, where he attacked the boy, and his craven attempt to steal Hiccup's inheritance, revealing finally his true motives for marrying Valka Trecha in such a hurry. Finally and most damningly, I shall present the testimony of the nurses who cared for Valka at her end, of how Trecha tried to have the son she summoned to her deathbed chased away, and how he threatened his dying wife for calling her only child to be with her at her end. He then left her grieving son to pay her hospital bills and arrange her cremation. He refused to answer any phone calls and missed the service for her funeral. Alvin Trecha is a loathsome and despicable human being who married a desperate and vulnerable woman with his eyes on her missing husband's inheritance. He abused and neglected her son, casting him out to starve in the Burke winter. Only the kindness of a fellow student spared him from freezing. Mala turned to glare at Alvin. He needs to be locked away for his crimes. Alvin glared back to her and sneered, rubbish. Chapter 92, Freedom. Chapter text. Alvin's lawyers fought furiously for him as Mala laid out her case, presenting witness after witness for her expert and carefully constructed prosecution. Doctors who cared for Hiccup, the gang, especially Astrid, the nurses from ICU who looked after Valka, Gobber, both Astrid's parents and the officiant from the crematorium had all testified against Alvin. Her star witness, of course, was Hiccup, who walked self-consciously to the stand, his lean shape rigid with anxiety. He knew he was no saint and had been warned by Mala that Alvin's lawyer would do everything to discredit him. And it had been very hard, revisiting the abuse, feeling so embarrassed and weak-earned, and useless. Explaining why he had accepted the slaps, the blows, how he had seen his mom picked upon and undermined, how Alvin drank at weekends and holidays and then grew angry and violent. How Hiccup used to distract Alvin's attention and ended up beaten or locked up for his troubles. And how Alvin had hounded him at home and school, giving detention, demanding every detail of his day and hitting him at will. Astrid sat through it all, watching him struggle as he gradually told his tale and displayed his scars when asked. "And why didn't you seek help from the Council Family Services Department when you were made homeless?" Mala asked quietly. He swallowed and took a slow breath. "Because they would have called home," he said shakily. "They would have taken me back because Alvin would have told them I ran away. And when I was taken back, after I had been thrown out, I was beaten and then thrown out again. And if it was so bad, why didn't you run away?" Mala asked gently. He played with his hands. "Mom," he said roughly. I couldn't leave her alone. I promised Dad I would look out for her. And when she died. Hiccup paled. She sent for me, asked me to come. She knew she was dying. Alvin didn't want me there and threatened her that she'd regret it, but she wanted me there. And I held her hand until she died. He gulped and looked down, absently palming his cheeks to wipe away the tears. And then, I found he'd gone and removed himself as next of kin. He left me to sort everything out. I had to ask the H. Horfersons to borrow the money to pay her bills and for the funeral. So why should we believe you, Hiccup? Mallow asked him firmly. Your disciplinary record is terrible, you confess to being in trouble with the cops, you've cut classes, truant school, indulged in petty pranks and mild vandalism, why should the jury believe you? Hiccup stared at her in a betrayed look. Because it's the truth, he said defiantly. You know, that's what Alvin always said. Who will they believe? A respected pillar of the community and principal of the high school, or a screw-up who's an inch from being kicked out of school? He paused and his shoulders sagged. And that's what makes it worse, because I have endured this for years, knowing no one will believe me. I have gone to bed so many nights with no food, been locked in the cellar as a punishment, lain in my room, my face burning with the slaps, or lying curled on my side, my body aching from a beating, and you know how horrible, how utterly desperate it feels to suffer that, to fear going home every day, and knowing no one will ever believe you because you're a bad boy. To know that my suffering is worth nothing because it's done by a well-respected man. And that if he killed me, if I never came back to school, no one would care. So why did you finally disclose what had happened to you? Mallow asked him. He sighed. Mom had turned against me, he sighed. When I was thrown out, I tried to contact her. I went to see her, but she sent me away. I tried calling. I gave her a present at Thanksgiving, a drawing with my cell number on. He handed over the folded drawing. But when I tried to contact her again, I was turned away. I was told I had phoned the wrong number when I called her while I was in hospital after I had been run down. In the end, when I was beaten at school by people who wanted me not to press charges against the guys who tried to kill me, I gave up. My mom was lost, school wasn't a safe place, and I just needed to reveal what had happened. The hospital had asked me before about the injuries, and I finally admitted them. Because he had started to target Astrid because she was my friend. And I wouldn't turn him in because it would hurt Mom, but I couldn't let him hurt anyone else. Even if it cost me my mom, I had to protect her. Thank you, Hiccup, Mallow said gently. Alvin's lawyer, a solid and aggressive man named Titus Alborg, rose and paced towards Hiccup. You're a liar, he condemned the boy. Hiccup stared at him and felt a surge of anger, but he recalled Mallow's words. Yeah, but not in this. He replied snarkily. Alborg sneered. You lied to Mr. Treacher all the time, he accused him. Hiccup nodded. Yeah, but what teenage boy tells his school principal everything he said to his friends? Well, not if he wants to have any friends, and what father slaps and beats his son for going out with his friends and not repeating everything he said to his friends? That never happened. Alborg snapped. How do you know? You weren't there. I was. Hiccup retorted. You lied when he asked you who decided the fight of the senior football team in the mall, Alborg snapped. Hiccup smiled grimly. Yeah, I stepped up and took the blame rather than the football captain and one of the best players so that they wouldn't beat my ass into oblivion and the team would do well, he said clearly. But Al found out from the class president who it actually was, and I was sent back to school and he put it around I had betrayed them. So he lied as well, though his lie caused the team to be weakened and me to be targeted by everyone for rolling on the players. There was silence in court and Alborg paused. You were jealous of his relationship with your mother, he accused the boy, and Hiccup sighed. I didn't like him, but my mom was happy, and I would endure anything for her, he said wearily. She loved him, but when he got angry, when he hit her, I wouldn't let that happen. I used to butt in, I used to take it for her. He paused. He hated me. He made my life hell. And I know he only wanted Mom. But I promised Dad I would look after her, and I did, as much as I could, because she was my only family and I loved her. Alborg spent the next hour trying to discredit Hiccup, insulting him, picking at him and sneering at him, but he maintained his cool and answered calmly and defiantly. And finally, he was released. He stumbled on his way to the seats and sank breathlessly by Astrid. Mallow sat back and Alborg called his only witness, Alvin Treacher. Alvin painted himself as the wronged party, a good and caring man who was abused and defied by a vicious and malign intruder. Hiccup was described as rude, sullen, defiant. He was accused of attacking Alvin and stealing from him. Astrid felt his hand tighten around hers and she saw his pale face, seeing his jaw tighten and eyes sparkle in anger, and she leaned close. Gently, he slid an arm around her and hugged her close, nuzzling against her hair and sighing. "They'll believe him," he murmured. "Gods, what was I thinking?" She moved her head to brush her lips against his cheek. "Have faith in Mallow," Astrid murmured as the rose slowly, her eyes sweeping over the huge shape in the witness box. She looked him over dismissively. "Mr. Treacher, you're a failure," she told him bluntly. He smirked. "You can't catch me like that," he sneered. She smiled and turned to face him. "Failure as a husband, you refused your wife medical care when she most needed it. Failure as a father because you beat and starved your stepson, then cast him out to freeze to death. Failure as a teacher because your stepson's grades collapsed under your care, in your house, a son who you would never permit to gain his diploma. And failure as a man, for walking away from his dying wife in a fit of jealousy over her dying wish to see her only child." "She had me, child," he shouted at her violently. "She killed him in her weakness. She failed me." Mallow narrowed her eyes and sighed. "It must have been so frustrating for you, having such an insolent and defiant boy in your home, eating your food, benefiting from your generosity," she said, and he nodded. "He refused to honor you in your home. He accorded you no respect. He never called you sir or father, just Al." Treacher frowned. "He were a difficult boy," he said through his teeth. "Difficult? He defied you. He lied to you. He refused to do his chores. He tried to turn your wife against you." Mallow challenged him. "He never stood a chance." "But he tried all the same." Mallow encouraged him. "Bet you hated that skinny little bastard, cheeking you, defying you and refusing to obey your rules." "I tolerated him because me wife were fond of him." "But he tried to turn her against you," Mallow persisted. "Objection." "And he used to disrespect you in front of the students at your own school." "That must have stung. Some skinny penniless little bastard daring to defy you in your own domain. Bet you wished you'd beaten the sass out of him sooner." "I got me belt on him soon enough, but I should have beaten the little bastard as soon as he started to cheek me." Alvin snarled. "I know he used to back off when I shouted at him, but he still needed to feel the weight of me and every day to keep his tongue still. And I belted him at least every week. But he still used to lie to you. He was a stubborn brat." Mallow smirked. Alvin leapt to his feet. "I would be broken him if I'd kept him longer, but I finally found a reason I could use to throw the little bastard out. I never wanted him back, but I could tell his mother that he ran off. And if he turned up, I could tell her that he fought me when I beat the little bastard and threw him out. Them cops believed me, they almost told me to beat him to stop his sass. So I were only doing what they suggested. And she were watching from the second floor. She saw me beat the little bastard in the yard and throw him out, and she did nothing. She never said a word, so I knew I'd won." Mallow straightened up and gave a thin smile, her cool gaze sweeping over the universally disgusted and appalled faces of the jury. "No, Mr. Treacher, I am pretty certain you've lost," she said, turning away. "I have nothing further for this witness," she added as she sat back in her seat. "Oh." It took the jury about 4 hours of deliberation, 2 of which were taken up with arguing over and ordering pizza, to find Alvin Treacher guilty of all charges. He was sentenced to 5 years in jail and he was taken away, still blustering and whining that it was a complete miscarriage of justice. The school board promptly fired him and barred him from ever working in Berks schools again. Hiccup sat still as the court emptied, staring at the dock and breathing slowly. Astrid sat loyally at his side, her hands twined with his. "It's over," she told him gently, leaning against him. He rested his head against her, his emerald eyes closing as he drew her hands against his body. "It will never be completely over," he sighed. "Gods, he took so much from me, including the last months of Mom's life, and probably Mom herself. At least, they saw through him, so he couldn't hurt you. She sighed and turned her head so she could nuzzle gently against him. I heard what you said, babe, she admitted. I know admitting the abuse hurt you, shamed you. And I know it turned your mom against you. I can't thank you enough for protecting me. He moved slightly and he kissed her forehead gently. I will always protect you because I love you, milady, he murmured gently. You are all I have left. She turned to him and wrapped her arms around him, staring up into his sad face. I love you too, babe, she murmured. And you will always have me. I'm not leaving you. She leaned up and kissed him. It's gonna take time, hiccup, but remember, he can't hurt you anymore. You're free. He stared into her smiling azure eyes and leaned forward. Freedom, he murmured. I had forgotten really what that felt like. She smiled coyly and slid her hands up to tangle in his auburn hair. Like this, she smirked and deeply kissed him. Chapter 93, Final Duty. Chapter text. School was over and graduation was only a week or so away, but Hiccup had something he needed to do before the day, a closure he had to achieve. So he made preparations and loaded the car he had bought 3 weeks earlier for this particular journey. Of course, Astrid was coming with him because she knew that he had been planning the trip for months, ever since his mom had died. Despite living with the Horfusons and being free of any contact of Alvin, he still had some dark days when the loss of his mom hit him hard, when guilt swirled tightly around the boy for failing to protect her from his malign influence, and on those days, Astrid stayed close to him, holding him and making sure he knew he wasn't alone. And on those days, he truly thanked Odin he had her. Once the others found out, they had all decided to come as well, so their private pilgrimage had rapidly turned into a road trip. They had packed tents and camping gear because it was a long way to go to just turn round and come back the same day. Astrid had checked Hiccup was okay and he had offered a wan smile, checking he had the most important item in his bag. You okay, babe? She asked him, her hand finding his. He gave a small nod, his expression distracted. Yeah, milady, just nervous, you know. I wanted to do this because I guess this is how she should want to go, to be with Dad, wherever he actually is, but it feels really final, you know. She nodded and turned to face him, her hands on his arms. Quietly, his hand slid to her waist. I know it is so hard, Hiccup, but I'm here with you, she told him gently. Don't worry, babe. You're not alone. He gave a pained smile. Yeah, he sighed, and then she rose other tiptoes and kissed him. Babe, you're not alone, she repeated, and he rested his forehead against hers. I'm not sure what I would do without you, he admitted. Never get on the road, she reminded him, and he gave a grin. Yes, milady, he said meekly, causing Snotlout to snigger. So whipped. Hiccup cast him a roll of the eyes and clambered into the driver's seat with Astrid beside him. Toothless bounded into the back before Heather and Fishlegs could scramble in. Snotlout was bringing the twins and Cammy along, but Irette had to work at the sports shop in the mall he worked at when he wasn't working at Gobbers, so he wasn't able to come, much to Ruff's dismay. Hiccup wished he had told her that he wasn't interested, but accepted that the other man had to live his own life, and make his own choices. But finally, they hit the road and headed out to the mountains above Burke and the area where Stoic had explained had vanished over 5 years earlier. Despite the destination, it was a lovely sunny day with a clear blue sky and the road was almost empty. They two cars left the highway and took the turn up into the moutons, beginning the long drive up the small, winding roads that had made the search for the missing man so difficult 5 years earlier. Hiccup had carefully navigated the way, stopping after an hour and a half to allow everyone to stretch their legs and Toothless to run off some energy. Despite his missing leg, the skinny black dog was still agile and filled with boundless energy. The gang had enjoyed the break and all had some snacks and drinks before heading up into the high mountains, the most remote part of the island. The roads got worse and worse, narrow tracks that barely existed in places and reduced their speed to a crawl. This is not comfortable, Heather complained, bouncing around. Not great, for my shocks, Hiccup added. Astrid grinned. Nor mine, she grinned. Milady, he said in shock, his eyes wide at the comment. And I thought you were a nice girl, says the class bad boy. She shot back. He blushed slightly. I think I just came second, he mumbled as her hand slid up his leg. Ugh. Astrid, wheel crash. We're doing about 5 miles an hour, just above walking pace, Fishlegs said happily from the back. Heather was clutching him as they jolted about, and though the ride was uncomfortable, the actual experience wasn't that unpleasant. It's not your car we're going to crash, Hiccup grumbled as they reached a dead end. He pulled up and sighed. This is as close as I can reckon to where the plane went down. He sighed, checking his GPS. He secured the car and got out. I think we're on foot now. Astrid jumped down and Toothless bounded to his side, tongue hanging out and tail wagging eagerly at the prospect of a good walk. Snotlout was already grumbling. We have to walk now. Just great, he snooked. Do you have any idea where you're going? Hiccup sighed and fished out his sketchbook. He flipped it open, the reveal maps, flight plans and calculations of where the plane was last known and where the supposed crash site was. The teens all grabbed their rucksacks and began hiking down the slope and into the isolated valley. Hiccup checked his traditional compass as well as a GPS and led the way. They walked for a couple of hours through the hot and windless afternoon. Snotlout had been moaning since 5 minutes after they left the car, his cap pushed back and face red. The guys and Cammy all wore caps except the twins, who had matching bush hats. Astrid wore her headband and Heather had a scarf wound around her brow. Hiccup paused, sweat streaming down his face in rivulets and tendrils of sweat-darkened hair stuck to his forehead. He looked hot and mildly sunburned, his pale complexion completely unsuited to a summer hike. Astrid took a sip of water and walked to his side, breathing hard. You okay, babe? She asked. She had seen him limping slightly and grimacing as they scrambled up the steep slope into the next part of the valley. He looked at her and gave her a very grateful smile. Legs aching, he sighed. All those exercises you ruthlessly forced me to do got me walking properly again, but I don't think my ankle was designed to climb over half of Burke. She gently caught his hand. I can see why you like him. Cammy piped up with a mischievous look. He's tall, gorgeously sweaty. And mine. Astrid growled, nuzzling against his neck possessively. Then she pulled a face. She's right about the sweaty bit though. She added in a low voice. He smirked. Not exactly the most fragrant yourself either. He murmured back, kissing her cheek gently. Fragrant? Did you want me to tell you that you're almost as sweaty and gross as I am? He asked her softly. He had already tensed in anticipation when her fist slammed into his shoulder. I think I've got a permanent bruise there, he added with a wince. You so deserved that, she retorted. You are much fitter than I am, milady, in every sense of the word, may I add, but we won't get much further if you beat me up. He suggested softly, and she smiled up at him, seeing the affection in his sparkling emerald gaze. Guys. It was Fishlegs. Can we have a moment, Fish? Just having a little personal time here. Hiccup murmured. Personal time. Well, I personally adored spending time bantering with you, my ferocious girlfriend. He added. You could, but maybe you may want to see this. Fish called from a few yards to their left. Hiccup sighed and rolled his eyes. Coming, he sighed. This better not be another low-damned plant. Snotlout called from the ground, where he was lying down, hands behind his head and sunbathing. You've talked about nothing but plants for the last 2 hours. Well, this area has fascinating primordial Burkean flora and fauna. Fishlegs retorted. Yeah. Tough shouted. His twin looked at him in shock. Not yeah. Fish, what was it? Hiccup sighed, limping up the slope. The husky boy pointed, and as they all looked, they saw weathered wreckage scattered at the bottom of the valley. Hiccup's eyes widened and he looked at Astrid. His mouth was suddenly dry and she nodded, taking charge. Move out, she snapped. Sooner we get down there, the sooner we can finish what we started. She caught Hiccup's hand for a second and nodded, then hefted her pack over her back and strode down the hill. Hiccup turned and walked after her, his green gaze fixed on the twisted metal, memories swirling round the boy. For a second, he recalled the last time he saw his father as he headed for the airport on that final, fateful day, the broad grin, the sparkling eyes, the enormous flaming red beard, the huge hug he had given his skinny, undergrown son, and the final twinkle in his eye as the front door closed behind him. He blinked and concentrated on the steep path, feeling the hard shape of the urn bounce in his backpack. He had brought Valka's ashes to spread on the site of the crash, to allow her to rest with her husband. When they hit the valley floor, Hiccup accelerated, ignoring the pain in his ankle and his exhaustion, his emerald gaze fixed on the twisted metal. He could see the red and brown flaming dragon logo of Dragon's Edge toes on a crumpled piece of fuselage, and as they closed, he could see part then all of the registration, D2RBRK. He paused and peered at the printout on his sketchbook, but he knew the registration by heart now. It was the same. Suddenly he accelerated and Astrid watched him sprint away, a faint limp still visible as he dashed forward with Toothless bounding after him, tongue lolling in the heat. She paused for just a second, then ran after him, swiping branches of the low shrubs aside as they finally found the crash site. Hiccup ground to a halt, breathing hard, his eyes fizzed on the crumpled wreckage. There was part of the main cabin and cockpit and fragments of wings and tail, but he stared at the smashed wreck and couldn't imagine anyone surviving such a horrible disaster. Astrid arrived at his side, seeing him blink and swallow as he tried to process what he was seeing. The others arrived noisily as Astrid took his hand and felt it tighten urgently around hers. "Is this it?" she asked, and he nodded. "Yeah," he sighed. "This is where my father died." Chapter 94, Witness. Chapter text. Silence fell over the group as Hiccup walked slowly forward to stare at the wreckage of his father's plane. Time and the harsh Burkian winters hadn't been kind to the remains, half the body of the plane and a wing completely missing and the rest crumpled and smashed. The exposed metal was corroding and the remains were overgrown with a creeper, grass and moss. He silently reached the cockpit and rested a hand against the warm metal, feeling the still smooth surface under his hand. I am sorry, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm not the son you would have wanted me to be, not the protector you expected me to become. I guess I'm just. He shook his head and a tear slid down his cheek. Astrid sighed. She had only seen him cry once before, when his mother died, and she knew what he wanted to say. She gently made her way to his side and took his hand in hers. "I'm here," she reassured him. "You don't have to do this alone." He nodded. "I'm just a disappointment, Dad," he sighed. "I tried, but I wasn't strong enough to stop Alvin. I wasn't brave enough to stay, to cope with it. I just had to keep pushing him back, to try to let him know I wasn't broken, but he broke Mum from me, and then, when I was thrown out, I wasn't there to stop him." He lifted his head and stared up at the sky. "He got her to stop her meds and try for a baby, and that killed her. But I should have been there to stop it." He closed his eyes. "I failed." Hiccup, "No." Astrid said, her grip tightening on his hand. No matter what she said, he persisted in beating himself up over Valka's death. She pulled him to face her. "No one could have done more. You endured absolute hell to try to stay at home, to stay with your mom. You were starved, beaten, neglected, bullied at home and school. You had almost no clothes, no real possessions, and Toothless was your only friend. How you managed to stay strong amazed me, and I thank Odin that you called me that night, because if you hadn't, you wouldn't have made it. You would have frozen to death on the streets." He dropped his head, his eyes still closed, and leaned back against the mangled fuselage. "My love, you were sick, freezing and alone. In the end, she sent you away, and you admitted you were willing to go back to Alvin, to endure whatever torments he put you through just to be with your mom, but you were rejected over and over, until it was too late." He nodded silently. She pressed her hands to his cheeks. "Look at me," she commanded him, and he reluctantly lifted his ashamed emerald gaze. "Hiccup, you did everything humanly possible to save her. Alvin was too evil for you to stop. It almost cost you your life, and it did screw up years of your life and put you in danger. His actions set dagger after you." Hiccup gave a reluctant nod. "But I could have turned him in for child abuse earlier," he said in a shamed voice. "It would have stopped him, maybe jailed him. And you told me that your mom almost certainly would have sided with him, called you a liar and disowned you anyway." Astrid reminded him. "She became so dependent on him that she was blind to everything that happened to you. She sent you away. She turned away when he beat you up. She told my mom it was a wrong number when she phoned when you were in surgery. It wouldn't have stopped her going back to him. You did all you could." He nodded again and his expression broke her heart. She kissed him tenderly and he kissed her back, though she could still taste the salt of his tears on his lips. Finally she pulled back and stared into his eyes, seeing how heartbroken he was. In the end, she wanted you, not him. She spent her last moments with the son she loved, because you were the one person she did truly love. She died holding your hand, not his. And you're here to make sure she rests with her real husband. You're a fine man, hiccuped the man I am proud to love. The person who is to blame is Alvin. Just remember your mom and dad as they were. And remember you still have me. He finally managed to smile, a very small tilt of the lips. I'm not sure if I could go on without you, he sighed. I love you, Astrid. And I owe you everything. He kissed her again. Now let's do this. They turned to the wreckage, hand in hand, and Hiccup fished out the plain bronze urn containing Valka's ashes. Ready? Astrid asked him gently and he nodded. He took the lid off and grasped her hand again. Goodbye, Mom, rest in peace. He said hoarsely and tipped the urn over, the breeze catching the ashes and gently spreading them over the crash site amid the grass. The empty urn fell to the ground with a thud as he turned to hug Astrid, burying his face in her shoulder. She held him for a long time, until suddenly a shout rang out. What are you doing there? The gang looked up and Hiccup swiped his face with his hand. We're just visiting the crash site, he explained, turning to face the man. My dad was on this plane, he died on this plane. The approaching man looked the skinny shape up and down and gave a curt nod. He was a small, round, bandy-legged man with graying blonde hair and beard and thoughtful blue eyes. Name's Sven. I live about these parts, the man introduced himself, sticking out an old hand which Hiccup took and shook firmly. Have for the last 50 years. Hiccup's brows dipped. You remember the crash? He asked, trying to keep the enthusiasm from his voice. The man scratched his stubbly beard and frowned, adjusting his Berk Vikings cap self-consciously. A little, I think, he admitted. There was a pause and Astrid saw Hiccup almost say something but then visibly stop himself. The older man frowned again. Look, son, I can see it means something to you, come up to my cabin and I'll tell you what I know. He glanced around the gang. You're all welcome. Is it far, sir? Astrid asked politely. The gang were all flagging and she could feel Hiccup fidgeting, trying to keep pressure off his pinned ankle. The man grinned, a reassuring gappy smile. Just up that slope, young miss, but I do have sodas and a cool breeze. He invited them. I'm in. Snotlout announced. Lead on. Hiccup rolled his eyes as the stranger, Sven, turned and stomped easily up the narrow track through the vegetation up the steep slope. They had been walking for 10 minutes when Snotlout changed his mind. This wasn't a good idea, he hissed. He's a mountain man. And? Hiccup asked, frowning. He was breathing hard and was soaked with sweat. His ankle was really sore and he wouldn't care if Sven was a certified flesh-eating zombie as long as there was a cool drink at the end of the walk. No, didn't you see that film? The one where the hiking teens met those isolated mountain people. Snotlout hissed worriedly. What, the one where they were hunted then humped then eaten? Tuff asked guilelessly. That was an awesome movie. Ruff added with a grin. Yeah, and the sequel was just as good. Cammy added. Right, Ast. Really couldn't say, since I had my eyes closed and my ears covered for most of it, them. Astrid panted. What, really? Heather asked, surprised. Hiccup rolled his eyes. You mean you still didn't tell them, he teased her. No, she growled. Never got round to it. Tell them what? Cammy asked him tersely. Astrid hates horror movies, Hiccup announced calmly. She doesn't like being scared. But you always come with us. Heather said in shock. You're my friends, Astrid said quietly, wiping her brow. You all wanted to see horror, so I was outvoted anyway. So you went and hated every single one? Ruff checked. Yeah. Sorry, Astrid mumbled. We are horrible people, Cammy announced. We never ever asked you what movie you wanted to see, did we? Astrid shook her head. We just assumed you wanted to see what we did. Astrid nodded. I am so sorry, Heather said genuinely. What would you want to see? Something I can snuggle against my boyfriend in, Astrid replied happily, and Hiccup gave a small grin. Horror, he smirked, recalling how she had snuggled against him in the horror movie in her own home. Not horror. Art. Romacom. Action. Even French language period drama. Astrid told him. Is no one worried about the being hunted and humped and eaten issue? Snotlout whined. Snotlout, firstly, just assume I was totally penniless and haven't been to the movies for years, so have no clue what you are talking about, Hiccup said impatiently. Then assume this is a normal person who lives in an isolated cabin, as people tend to all over Berk because Vikings are hard-headed and frequently prefer their own company. He's not about to cannibalize us or anything else. No humping? Snotlout asked. What is it with you? Hiccup sighed. No being hunted for my life. Snotlout asked. I can if you want me to. Sven shouted back. But really, it's too hot. We don't hunt strangers, at least until September. Ah. I like him already, Astrid commented as the ground finally flattened out and they arrived at a very neatly tended cabin with the screen door open and a satellite dish on the roof. He's got satellite. Fishlegs gasped. Sven huffed. It's isolated here, but I'm not a savage, living in the Dark Ages, he said sarcastically. Okay, I like him as well, Hiccup added. Sven grinned and invited them in, fishing cans of soda and beer from a well-stocked fridge and passing them around. The teens all settled on various chairs or on the floor, savoring their drinks. Snotlout had carefully made sure he was right by the door in case of some horrible turn of events. Hiccup took a long drink and sighed. Astrid rested against him, her head on his shoulder, and his arm automatically slid round her waist. So, the crash, he suggested. The man chugged on his beer. It was one of them misty nights over the mountains, he explained. I was watching some crime drama thing. Watching? Fish asked from by the fireplace. Got myself a flat screen TV. He said and pointed to the device over the fireplace. Satellite, generator, not a savage. Fish blushed. Suddenly, heard this terrible noise, heard a plane real close, then crashing noises, an explosion, and nothing. Hiccup's arm tightened around Astrid and she opened her eyes and looked into his face. He was taut with anxiety. So you didn't see the crash, he asked. No. But went down in the dark to see if I could find any survivors, Sven admitted. All eyes were on him now. Sorry, lad, I didn't see anyone. Hiccup sagged, but the man gave a smile. My neighbor may be seen. Hiccup's eyes widened. Can you take us to him? Chapter 95, read. Chapter text. They stopped to finish their drinks, have a snack and use the restroom. Sven invited them to leave their tents and pitch them behind the cabin overnight, and the gang had decided to take him up on his offer, so they had pitched their tents and made camp before heading down the slope to Sven's neighbor, a man called Red. Sven had explained the man had a much more basic cabin that had been built with his late cousin's hands but lacking electricity and satellite. Hiccup had nodded, his eyes expressing his impatience, but he knew he was far luckier than he had hoped. Eventually, the twins had finished sabotaging each other's tents and Sven led them down the slope. Hiccup was very quiet as he limped down the slope. You okay, babe? Astrid murmured. You should be resting that ankle. He managed a wan smile. Good thing I know a prospective physical therapist, he told her with a smile, his hand brushing hers. Good thing I know an idiot who won't rest his broken ankle to give me some practice, she smirked as they rounded a clump of firs and found a simple, oblong cabin, the only ornamentation a carven dragon's head over the door. Sven walked up to the door and hammered his fist on it. Toothless bounded up and pawed at the door, whining. Red. You in there? I got some folks want to talk to you about that crash years back. Hiccup felt his pulse accelerate as he heard sounds from within the cabin and the clump of approaching boots. Finally the door opened and a huge shape stood in the doorway. Hiccup stared at him as Toothless gave one final, triumphant bark and sat, his tail wagging ceaselessly. Red. These kids wanna know about that crash. You were closer, did you see anything? Sven asked cheerily. This lad here, the skinny one, lost his father on the plane. Can you help? The man frowned, his big face creasing. Grey-green eyes narrowed as he inspected the people facing him and his hand scratched the huge red beard. "I'll do as much as I can," he said, the voice hoarse. Hiccup stared, his mouth hanging open in shock. "Dad," he said. "Oh." Every eye turned on the boy, his face colorless, as if he had seen a ghost. Astrid felt him tremble, his hand tight around hers. The big man frowned, shaking his head. His check shirt strained across his massive chest, his powerful arms bracing against the door frame. "Dad," he mumbled, his voice thoughtful. "Red, you okay, my friend?" Sven asked. The big man stared at the skinny shape facing him, his eyes narrowing as he met the wide emerald eyes and the pale face. His hand stretched out to tussle the messy auburn hair, darkened with sweat from the long hike. "Hiccup," he whispered. The boy nodded wordlessly. "Hiccup. That's a person?" Sven asked in confusion. "I know when you were drunk, you'd mumble a few words, and Hiccup was one of them." "And the others?" Astrid asked, staring at the boy. "He was frozen. Gobber, Valka, and Hiccup." Sven explained easily. "None of them sounded much like people, except Valka." "Mom." Hiccup breathed. "Hiccup," the red-bearded man repeated more strongly, blinking as if waking from a dream. Astrid noted there was a scar across his forehead, winding its way into the graying flame-red hair. "Son." "Dad." Hiccup croaked, and broke away from Astrid, to find himself engulfed in a huge pair of arms. His arms stretched round the man's body and his face buried in the chest as the man gave him a powerful hug. "Hiccup," the man said, his head bowing to rest his cheek on the boy's head. "Wait, he is the boy's father?" Sven asked, confused. "Yes." Astrid and Snotlout said simultaneously, and then the girl stared at the other boy in shock. "I've seen the picture of Hiccup and his parents," she said suspiciously, "but how did you?" "Look, I've seen pictures of Uncle Stoic from when I was very small, before my father argued with him and broke off contact with his sister completely," Snotlout said in embarrassment. "Wait, you really actually are his cousin?" Heather asked him. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck and looking embarrassed. "I knew he was my cousin, but they argued when we were real small," the dark-haired boy admitted. "I know my dad was really sore about it, so I kind of was brought up to hate him." "That's why you insisted we had to come?" "Because she was your aunt as well." Tough Nut realized. "I feel so used. And sweaty." Stoic pulled away a little and inspected the tall skinny shape, the emerald eyes shining with shock. "You look so like your mother," the big man murmured, his big hand stroking the wild hair and tracing down the pale cheek. Hiccup groaned and closed his eyes, his head dropping. "Hiccup. You're your mother." He was already shaking his head, trying to pull back from the big man when Stoic advanced a pace. "Oh Dad, I am so sorry," Hiccup said, his head curling forward and shoulders hunching as if expecting a blow. Astrid immediately found his hand and pressed against him, comforting the boy as he literally shook with emotion. Her worried azure gaze swept up to meet the man's astonished gaze. "Mr. Haddock, I'm sorry to tell you that Valka, Hiccup's mom, died in February," she said. His eyes widened and he started, then stumbled back a pace. He stared at Hiccup, who was still trembling. "How?" the big man asked, his deep voice shocked. Then he focused on the beautiful young woman facing him. "Who are you?" "I am Astrid Horferson, Hiccup's girlfriend," she began, and Stoic's eyes cleared a little more. "Ingrid and Martin's girl," he murmured, almost to himself. Astrid nodded. "Hiccup is living with my parents since he lost his mom," she said, electing not to get into the whole Alvin business at this moment in time. "We came up here because Hiccup wanted to spread Valka's ashes on the crash site, so she could rest with her husband." "But I'm not dead," Stoic Haddock said gruffly, and then he blinked as realization struck him. "But everyone thinks I am, don't they?" He looked at the boy who was composing himself and stared in shock. "He grew up," he murmured. "How long was I gone?" "Dad, the crash was 5.5 years ago," Hiccup said hoarsely, swallowing. "You were missing, but they never really found the crash site. They visited up here, found no survivors, and that was it. You were missing. So Mum and I were left penniless." "Gobber. That lunatic." He means well, but he can barely afford a one-bedroom apartment. Hiccup sighed. It's been so hard, Dad. I tried. Sir, how come you stayed here for so long? Astrid asked. Blah blah blah. The real question is why he's talking normally when he couldn't remember who his son was 10 minutes ago. Snotlout asked impatiently. Stoic's eyes narrowed. Are you Spitaloot's boy? He asked suspiciously. See. He hasn't seen me since I was 4 and he remembers me. Snotlout said triumphantly. You're the image of your father when I first met him. Stock said impatiently. Hiccup palmed his face and took a shuddering breath. Dad, what happened? He asked, his eyes inspecting the man. How come you didn't come home? Stoic frowned and rubbed his forehead. I remember an explosion, and then it went black. Stoic murmured. It was dark and there were flames. My head hurt, I took off my jacket, lost it, and walked out away from the flames. This man asked me what I saw and I said a crash, but I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. So when he took me to his cabin, I accepted. I couldn't remember a name, so he called me Red. No one came about the crash, apart from Sven, so I just got on with things, hunting, trapping, keeping alive. When my cousin, a man named Hawk, died during the night 4 years ago, I buried him in the forest and took over the cabin. Been here ever since. Mountain Man. Tough commented. Everyone cast him an unfriendly glare. What? No, I think he's right, Sven commented. No one came down here despite my telling them there was a witness to check on the crash. Maybe they would have found him if they'd done their job properly. He shrugged. I think we better get back to the cabin, my cabin, Red. We can talk there, and I think these youngsters have a lot to catch up with, particularly your boy and his girl. Stoic stared at the young couple and his eyes softened. Yes, I think there's a huge amount to catch up with, he commented. Hiccup gave a smile and nodded. I prayed and hoped so hard that one day you would come back, that you weren't dead, he said softly. Sometimes, I was so unhappy, I just wanted to give in so I could see you again. I'm glad you're alive, Dad. The big man gave him another bone-crushing hug. So am I, son, so am I, he said. Chapter 96, Back from the Dead. Chapter text. It was late afternoon when the group made it back to Sven's very comfortable cabin, still sweating and hot. Stoic had walked alongside his son, murmuring questions, but the young man had been stunned and he had only managed a few vague answers. Astrid had watched him with concern, seeing his confusion but not wanting to intrude on the reunion between her boyfriend and his long-lost father. But as they approached the cabin, Hiccup paused and looked for her, his anxious green eyes finding her and flooding with relief. He stretched his arm for her, and she sped up to lock hands with Ghosted her a smile, feeling her warm grip reassure him as nothing else could. Sven made them all comfortable and fired up his barbecue, hauling out slabs of beef and ribs from his freezer. It's time for a celebration, he had explained, producing a keg of beer. And I don't get many visitors around here anyways. Stoic had offered to help, heading out to chop some wood for the barbecue while Astrid stretched her legs and rested back against the couch. Hiccup had slumped by her, his face still in shock. She grabbed his arm and pulled him close. He was sweaty and exhausted, but he curled his arms around her and pressed a tender kiss to her temple. You okay, babe? She asked him softly, seeing his eyes trail through the open back door to see the huge shape of his father swinging the heavy axe like a toothpick. He shook his head. I don't know what to think, he admitted faintly. I had accepted Dad was gone when the court awarded me his money. I know Mom is gone. I came up to put them both to rest so that I could move on after school, and suddenly, he's alive. He shook his head. I mean, I should be happy. And I am happy, but I don't know what's going to happen. He forgot me and Mom. Will he remember anything apart from my name? What's he going to do now? I guess you're overthinking, babe, she said, trailing a finger lightly down his chest. She rested her hand briefly onto his chest. What does this tell you? My girlfriend likes sweaty and sunburned redheads, he suggested, smiling. Well, only one specific one. She reminded him, hauling him into a kiss. Leaning in, he kissed her back, lips moving sensuously over hers, his hands sliding down to her waist. Steady on, son. There are other people here. Sven, you didn't tell me he was a hit with the ladies. But that's my boy, boomed a laughing voice, and the two teens pulled apart as if shot. Stoic was looming over them, grinning. Dad. Hiccup whined in utter embarrassment. Astrid buried her face in his chest for a long moment, and when she looked up, her face was beet red. Mr. Haddock. She mumbled. Cool grey-green eyes inspected her closely. How long has this been going on for? He asked. How close are you? Have you? That's not your business. Hiccup snapped, his emerald eyes glittering with anger. Gods. I have had to live for over 5 years without you. I have had to deal with Mom remarrying an abusive bastard who gave me hell for years, with being starved and thrown out on the streets, with being targeted by my so-called friends, run down and almost killed, and all through it, I had no father. My father was dead. And Astrid saved me. She took me in, she befriended me, I love her. Stoic backed up a step, his eyes a little confused. I am your father and I should be concerned about your relationships. Hiccup scrambled up, his eyes flashing with rage. That ship has sailed, he shouted. You don't come here and start telling me what to do. I've had that for 4 years with Elle and I'm not taking it from you as well. Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when Mom needed you? When we were penniless, or homeless, or so desperate even Alvin Treacher seemed like an improvement. I didn't remember. I did. I remember it all. Hiccup shouted and shoved past him, heading out into the backyard, his breathing ragged. Astrid clambered up and Stoic grasped her arm. What? He began, but she pulled away. Let me go to him, she said urgently. He's really struggling with this. Astrid, why is he so angry? Stoic asked her in a concerned voice. I mean, he was never angry, he was such a happy and trusting boy. She glared at him. Yeah, well, a lot can change on 5 years, Mr. Haddock, she said shortly. What happened? Stock asked her sternly, looming over her. She backed away. Hiccup needs to tell you, she said evasively, but he grabbed her wrist and held her firm. I need to know now, he said angrily. Something has happened to my son and... Mr. Haddock. Astrid snapped, her azure glare sweeping over his face as she wrestled to get her hand free. Let me go. Get off of me. Running feet approached and Hiccup raced in, his emerald eyes filled with anger. Without hesitating, he threw himself at Stoic, grabbing the man's hand and wrestling Astrid's hand free. Stoic looked shocked at the lean shape, standing protectively between the huge shape and his girlfriend. Don't you ever touch her, he growled through his teeth. You don't have the right. Astrid caught his arm, her hands gentle on his shaking body. Babe, it's okay. She tried to reassure him, but he turned to her. That's what Mom kept saying, he told her in a stricken voice. It's okay, Hiccup. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. But everything was. He wrapped his arms around her. And I won't let anything like that happen to you. He glanced up at the shocked shape of his father, the grey-green eyes uncomprehending. Mom's new husband was abusive, Hiccup told him softly. Mainly words with her, he was controlling and cruel and very picky and demanding. He paused. With me, well, he just liked hitting me. Stoic reeled back a pace and suddenly realized what had happened, and what he had done. Breathing heavily in shock, he saw the tall, lean shape of his son, hugging the blonde girl protectively, his face wary and eyes ashamed, and everything fell into place. Stoic shook his head. I'm sorry, he said softly. It was like waking from a dream, seeing you. It was like suddenly I was me, after being in a trance for so long, and the last time I recalled you, you were smaller and skinnier, and here you are now, all grown up, and I've missed 5 years of your life, my wife's remarriage and death, and you're now grown up with a girlfriend, and I just see my son, still 12 years of age, and my wife, happy and smiling as I close the door for that flight. Breathing hard, Hiccup swung his emerald gaze to stare into Astrid's face, and she gave a small smile. I'm okay, she assured him gently. Don't worry, babe, talk to him. She pressed a gentle kiss on his cheek. She nodded and he slowly released her, turning to face his father. I don't know about you, he said softly, but I need a drink. Oh. It took most of the evening for Hiccup to explain what had happened, everything from their desperate money troubles after Stoic had vanished through Alvin's courtship and the marriage to his mom's death and the trial. The gang had listened, drinking beers and sodas and munching through steaks, burgers and lots of ribs. At Hiccup's request, they hadn't been in court for his testimony because he had been ashamed of what had happened, but the guys were in fact amazingly supportive. "You did great," Cause Snotlout said, surprising everyone. "You did more than I would have even imagined possible to keep your home and protect your mom. And I am so sorry I never knew how difficult it was, because if Dad hadn't been such an ass, we could have helped." There was a silence, before Tough Nut poked him in the arm. "What have you done with Snotlout?" he asked suspiciously. "I think he just grew up," Fishlegs commented, hearing Heather laughing softly. "I refuse to," Tough announced. "I'll be Tough Nut forever." Ruff threw a cushion at him. "Great. I'll be looking after a wannabe teen in my 80s," she grumbled. Astrid stared at Stoic and sighed. All was not all right, and she could tell Hiccup knew it as well. Though he had regained some of his memory, Stoic continued to ask questions, frequently asking things that the teens had already answered, and then asking them again 10 or 15 minutes later. Her gaze drifted to the old scar on his head and she felt Hiccup shift against her. "Gobber is going to be complete blown away by this," he murmured. "He's getting his best friend back, though he's not quite the same as he used to be." He sighed and sipped his beer. "He looks like Dad, but there's something missing." "He's had a serious head injury, hasn't he?" she murmured softly. He nodded. "I don't know where he'll stay, but I guess I should look after him," he sighed, then kissed her hair gently. "And I actually really want to stay with you." "I think he may have a say anyway," she smiled. "He's looked after himself for years out on the middle of nowhere, he may not want some moody teen moving in with him." "Moody teen?" he asked her playfully. "When have I been moody?" "Oh, let me think, yesterday. When Mom asked you to take the trash out, you were very moody." "Was not. I was washing Toothless and Stormfly in the yard and got a fateful of wet dogs." "And she asked you anyway?" "I only did it because you were doing your hair and said you were busy." "How about?" He kissed her, effectively silencing her. "How moody do you want me to be?" he purred. She smiled. "This will do nicely," she admitted. Chapter 97, Dad. Chapter text. They slept fitfully, for it was a sultry night, the kind they got about once a year in Berk, but Hiccup's mind was whirling, playing the events of the day over and over. Finally, he scrambled out of his tent with Toothless silently following, his tail wagging happily, and walked quietly into the cabin to find Stoic sitting on the couch, staring into the dark. "Hey, Dad," Hiccup said calmly. "Couldn't sleep?" The big man blinked, then shook his head with a sigh. "Big day," he mumbled, then moved along the couch, tacitly inviting his son to sit by him. Hiccup warily perched on the couch, stealing a thoughtful glance at the man. Toothless sat at his side. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry, Dad," he said after a deep breath. "I failed you." Stoic looked at him in wordless shock, jaw slack as the young man his son had become turned to him, his green eyes glittering in the half-light. "I promised to protect Mom, but Alvin was too strong, I was just..." A hand gently landed on his shoulder and he looked up into Stoic's face, the eyes kind and forgiving. "No, son," he said gently. "It was I who failed. You both. I should have remembered you. I should have come home, and then he never would have hurt either of you." Hiccup gave a small smile. "Dad, it was 1,000,000 to 1 you survived the crash," he admitted. "Odin must have been watching over you." Stoic sighed. "I wish he had been watching out for you instead," he sighed. "Though I am so proud at the man you have become, a fine, brave, caring man who has a great group of friends and a beautiful girl." Hiccup gave a lopsided smile. 6 months ago, I was still the class screw-up, pretty much universally despised," he told his father. "I was made homeless, starving and freezing, I had no friends." Toothless whined. "Yeah, apart from you, you useless mutt." But he patted the dog affectionately. Stoic extended his hand and Toothless sniffed it, then licked it solemnly. "Where did you find him?" Stoic asked. Hiccup sighed. "On the way home, he was in the park, all alone. Just like me." He was hungry so I fed him, he was my only friend. He patted the dog again, who gave his toothless smile. I hid him from Elle and fed him from my earnings from Gobber. He paused and smiled. Boy, is he gonna be surprised. Stoic gave a grin. I'm looking forward to seeing him again, he admitted. He was my friend from when I started elementary school. Then he wrapped his arm around Hiccup and grinned. Take this advice from a man who lost 5 years of his life, don't let that girl go and tell her you love her. Best friends last a lifetime, however long that is. Oh. The next morning, Snotlout and Fishlegs went to collect the cars with Sven, since there was a very good road that led round the back of the valley to his cabin. Snotlout grumbled but cheered up when Cammy and Heather offered to keep them company. Hiccup, Astrid, Stoic and Toothless trekked down to the crash site one last time to say goodbye to Valka. Stoic was very quiet as he stared at the wreckage, murmuring a prayer and then stopping to lift the bronze urn. He looked askance of Hiccup. Son, do you mind if I keep this? He asked. You know, to keep her close. Hiccup had nodded, his arm around Astrid as he stared at the site once more. In a way, Stoic had died there. The man standing by him was very different to the active, driven father he recalled, but at least he had something back, someone he could call family once more. Toothless barked, sniffing at a pile of rotten fabric and digging out a sagging leather object. The teen hunkered down, and realized he was looking at a very battered wallet. He flipped it open and pulled out the ID to see his father's face look back at him. Wordlessly, he handed it to Stoic and the man frowned, seeing his face and fishing out a small photograph of himself, his wife and son as they were, the happy little family they had been, before that one tragedy had destroyed them. Toothless gave a little bark and Stoic nodded, tucking the precious image away and sliding the wallet into his pocket. Goodbye, my love, he murmured gruffly, then turned back up the hill to meet the cars. Hiccup stared at the wreckage once more, then noted down the GPS location, took a couple of pictures on his phone and followed him, Astrid at his side. You okay, babe? She asked him in a low voice as Toothless raced past them to follow Stoic, then galloped back to circle them before racing off again. Hiccup smiled. I wish I had his energy, he admitted. I was up most of the night. I couldn't sleep. She looked carefully at him and smiled. It's a lot to take in, she admitted. She had lain awake as well, worrying for him because she had seen the utter shock in his face, and knew how much guilt he felt at failing his father. He had visited Stoic's grave so many times to talk to his father, and to find the man there, though not quite as he had been, would have made him unnerved. He sighed. You know, I kinda accepted how my life was, who I had in it, he admitted as they walked up the slope. And then, bang. Suddenly my dead father is alive and living in the wilds and I'm back up to one parent again, though I kinda don't know him anymore, and gods, I really don't want to leave you and your parents. You don't have to, she reminded him. Your home is with us now, and we can sort something out, babe. She took his hand and he smiled at her, matching his pace with hers. Now let's all go home. Oh. The journey back was interesting. Snotlout had whined about having to walk to the cars and about the changes to the seating arrangements to fit Stoic in. Fishlegs and Heather had moved over to join Snotlout and the twins, and Cammy had moved across to be with Hiccup, Astrid, Stoic and Toothless. Sven had sent them all off with steak sandwiches and had left his cell number, promising to visit them next time he came into town. Once they had found their way out of the valley, which took longer than expected when they followed Snotlout's shortcut that Hiccup confidently reckoned added an hour to the journey, they had settled down to concentrate on the winding roads. The drive had been quiet and awkward, with Stoic criticizing Hiccup's driving and offering very forceful tips on how to drive properly until the boy had snapped that he had no right to criticize because he didn't have a license as he was dead. They had then driven in incredibly awkward silence for another hour until they had stopped just shy of the main highway. Hiccup had sighed as he got out and stretched his legs, letting Toothless run some energy off. Hiccup stalked away from the car and sat on a rock, his head in his hands. Astrid glared at Stoic and pointed at his son. Sighing, the flame-haired man walked to his son. Hiccup glanced up, his eyes wary. Sorry, Dad, Hiccup said. But the last thing I need is a backseat driver. Especially a ghost, Stoic suggested with a grin. Hiccup managed a wan smile. Look, Son, I can see you are your own man, and I think you've been looking after yourself for a long time, ever since I left, I guess. You don't need a parent hanging around over you all the time, and I can't help that I still think of you as that scrawny little 12-year-old I left. I don't want you to move out of the home you're in, and leave your girl. He glanced over to Astrid. She's smart, beautiful, caring, everything your mother was. Way to creep me out, Dad Hiccup grumped as Toothless bounded by and almost knocked him off his seat. And thanks for nothing, you useless mutt, he yelled after the dog. Stoic grinned. My point is, I don't need to live with you and you really don't need an old man living with you, and cramping your style, he said thoughtfully as Hiccup face-palmed and blushed scarlet. Son, you stay where you are, I know where I can live for the short term, and then we can make some arrangement for when I am officially alive again. There was something infectiously optimistic about his grin and Hiccup couldn't help returning it. And I know someone who can officially bring you back to life, he grinned, rising achingly to his feet. He stared up into his father's face and threw his arms around him. I'm really glad you're here, Dad. Stoic hugged him fiercely. Son, he said gruffly. Thank Odin you came to do the right thing by your mother, or I would remain lost for however long I would live. Dad, air. Hiccup gasped. Need air to breathe. The big man released the vice-like hug and his tall, skinny son gave a huge gasp. The others were out and roaring with laughter as he staggered free, bracing his hands on his knees and gasping to refill his crushed lungs. Gods, you always used to do this when I was small, he protested. You're still small. Stoic told him, laughing. Smaller. Hiccup retorted, straightening up and glaring spiritedly at his father. Astrid wrapped her arms around him from behind and rested her head against his back. You're the right size for me, she murmured, and a cocky smile lit his face. He turned to face her. And Thor, your father must never hear you saying that either, he grinned. And I think it's time we hit the road again. Fishlegs said quickly before Snotlout could make any more gagging noises that he was already making. Hiccup stole a small kiss from Astrid before they got back into the car. I think your dad may have a sense of humor, she murmured. He rolled his eyes. Yeah, he's a real joker, always at my expense, he sighed. Thank Thor he's not staying with me. Her azure gaze widened. What? But I thought. She gabbled. His eyebrow arched. Are you trying to get rid of me, milady? I see it all now. No. No. But, I mean, he's your dad. She said urgently. He's a stranger, a man I haven't seen for over 5 years and who is a different man to the person my dad was, Hiccup sighed. He sorta looks the same, but he's not. And he knows he needs to be with someone who will accept him, and who he won't burden down. Her eyes widened in shock and almost disappointment, but he sighed. I would live with him, but he wants me to take him to someone he feels he would be better staying with, at least to start with. Who? Oh. Gobber opened the door of his apartment, stared blankly at the enormous man standing by his godson and dropped his glass of mead in utter shock. Then he slammed the door. Gobber. Open the damned door. Stoic bellowed. You're dead. Gobber yelled back. You're a ghost, escaped from Helheim. I'm not dead. I can hear that, grumbled a neighbor, poking his head miserably round the door. Hiccup spun at the voice. Mr. Mildew, he gaped as Stoic narrowed his eyes. He had heard the name mentioned. I didn't realize you lived here. Gobber. I'm alive. What? You went to the shops, took a wrong turning and got lost for 5 years. Gobber yelled through the door. My plane crashed. Stoic shouted. I was injured and had amnesia. The door opened. Then why are ye here? Gobber asked, glaring. Stoic wrapped a proud arm around Hiccup's shoulders. My son, he announced. He came to put his mother to rest with me, found the crash site that the police failed to 5 years ago and tracked me down. Seeing him brought some of it back. Some? Gobber asked suspiciously. Stoic sighed. There are gaps, he said heavily. I can feel, there are things missing. But I came home because my son is here. Gobber looked carefully at Hiccup, wary, sunburnt and grimy, and cracked a grin. That he is thought only through the stubbornness of high self and that girl his. Hiccup heard Astrid huff and sighed. You mean my fabulous girlfriend, Astrid, he checked diplomatically. The very same. Gobber grinned. But the boy needs his space and I was just wondering if. Stoic asked, his usually bluff face suddenly uncertain. Gobber gave a slow smile. Yes, won't I stay we old Gobber, he grinned. I'm 6 months older than you, you know. Stoic huffed with a twinkle in his eye. Gobber threw a huge hug around him and Mildew made a snorting noise, turning to his apartment and tripping over his fluffy off-white terrier. Ger out me way, Fungus, he grumbled and slammed the door. Gobber looked over to Hiccup and Astrid. I'll take it from here, he smiled. You both look exhausted. Go home. Stoic grinned to them, hugged both carefully and vanished into the apartment, the sounds of loud voices audible through the door as Gobber began to explain the arrangements. Hiccup stared at the door for a long moment before Astrid's arm slid round his narrow waist. You know, I almost feel sorry for Mildew, he said as they turned to the stairs. Really? Astrid asked suspiciously. I said almost, he qualified. Those two don't have a quiet setting, drink late into the night and sing really loudly and badly. Astrid paused, imagining the miserable old teacher's response and started giggling. Oh, Thor, she muttered. That will be hell. Hiccup grinned. Perfect, he murmured. Now home. I need a shower. Astrid nodded as they emerged into the sunny afternoon. At least 2 showers, Mr. Stinky, she teased him. But there is a more pressing problem. Hiccup quirked an eyebrow. And that is? What are you going to tell my parents? Chapter 98, Finishing Line. Chapter text. Graduation day dawned, bright and sunny, and Astrid leapt out of bed, eager to get moving. She was in the shower early and was braiding her hair as her parents emerged. Her father gave a small smile. See? You can get up when you want to, Martin teased, and she scowled at them, but not for long. She was just so excited at finally reaching this day. Hiccup's door opened and he trudged out. So no chance of a lion, he grumbled, running his fingers through his wild auburn hair and yawning. The weather was still hot, so he was wearing shorts, and Astrid found her eyes drifting to the scars on his left leg. They were still ugly and red, though starting to fade a little, and she recalled that horrible moment when he had been struck, when she had heard the thud and the scream as he fell. She closed her eyes. Warm hands closed gently on her shoulders and she opened her eyes as Hiccup leaned close, his emerald gaze concerned. Are you okay, milady? He murmured gently. She managed a wan smile, sighing. I just saw. Her eyes drifted to his legs. And I remembered. He kissed her forehead gently. I'm alive, Astrid, he reassured her. Still got 2 legs as well, and the most fabulous girlfriend, a dead mother, a father back from the dead after 5 years, a crazy 3-legged dog, and a frankly insane 2-limbed godfather. He grinned. Would have taken that all day long when Elle threw me out in October. I never thought I would graduate, I never dreamed I would ever have such a wonderful person in my life, and I will never stop thanking Odin for you all. Ingrid blinked, her eyes suddenly moist, and hugged her husband. We're going to be so proud of you both today, she said. Hiccup shrugged. Astrid's the one to be proud of, he told them cheerfully. I'm just there to make up the numbers. You're more than that, she protested. Carry your bag, he suggested. She smirked. My own private footman, she grinned. Carry me. He looked appealingly to Martin. Little help here. How is this fair? He protested. Martin smiled back. She's your girlfriend, he reminded Hiccup, and the boy sighed, reaching forward and picking her up bridal style. Her parents both gaped, realizing he was stronger than he looked. Okay, milady. He groaned, where to? She giggled and draped her arms around his neck. Breakfast please, she said superiorly, and he walked carefully to the stairs. Your wish is my command, he said cheekily, and stole a small kiss before carrying her downstairs. Oh. Graduation was held on the sports field with the proud parents seated behind the graduating students. Hiccup was amazingly self-conscious in his deep brown cap and gown. The stage and lectern were decorated in the brown, red and green colors of Burke High, and the students were all seated ready to start. Hiccup had checked that Gobber and his dad were seated in their finest next to the Horfusons. and Astrid was at Hiccup's side because her name was next to his in the alphabet and at the edge of the row as she was the class speaker. His hands drifted down and his fingers touched hers. She smiled and her hand curled around his as Principal Johann stood up as the ceremony started. "Welcome students, friends, parents, staff," he said clearly, his voice echoing around the stadium. "Today is a momentous day, the day the senior class graduates and we send these young men and women out into the world with Berk's values of hard work, single-minded determination and loyalty to gird them against the trials they will face." Astrid was concentrating hard, her brow lightly furrowed and lips pursed. Hiccup knew he should be paying attention, but frankly, she was much more enticing and he gave a slight sigh, shuffling his feet before turning his emerald gaze back to Johann. The man had launched into an irrelevant story before swinging his narrative back to the seniors. "This year has faced challenges," Johann continued. "Whether the work which has been harder than ever or disciplinary with the record number of suspensions, this senior class has faced more obstacles than usual. And there have been tragedies, a student a victim of a hit-and-run accident, bullying and violence, and the suspension and subsequent imprisonment of the principal for child abuse." He paused and stared over the attentive students, his eyes drifting over the hunched figure of Hiccup, who was inspecting the grass furiously. "But there have been successes. The football team won the Archipelago Cup for an unprecedented third consecutive year. We have won several scholarships and a statewide prize, as well as having a number of students graduating on the honor roll." He smiled and then lifted his notes. "Now, without further ado, the diplomas." Hiccup walked up to collect his diploma with a self-conscious smile, having scored as in math, physics and art and overall AB. There was cheering from his friends, polite applause from the parents and whooping and cheering from Stoic and Gobber. The Horfusons were also clapping loudly, and for a moment, Hiccup paused and grinned at them before he accepted his diploma with a firm handshake. Astrid graduated with a straighter average, on the honor roll and as top graduating student. Hiccup was whistling and Stoic and Gobber cheered just as loudly as for the boy. The entire year stood to applaud her and she blushed and smiled as she accepted her diploma. Once the diplomas were handed out, Johann handed out some additional awards. Snotlout, Eret, Fishlegs and Tough Nut all won football scholarships to Archipelago University. Astrid was awarded the Good Citizen Prize, traditionally awarded to the outgoing class president, and Roland won the prize for fundraising for good causes. Heather and Anna jointly won the prize for ancient Viking culture, having got the best overall marks in Viking history, mythology and ancient Norse. Then Johann paused. "There is one additional award that must be handed out," he announced. "I have only received confirmation of this today. It was felt that this year, Berk High had an artist among us talented enough to submit as a candidate for the coveted statewide scholarship, and I am pleased to announce that, for the first time, a student from Berk has won the prize. Step forward the winner of a scholarship that can be applied to whatever course the winner chooses." Hiccup Haddock. Hiccup blinked and stared. What?" he muttered. Astrid elbowed him. "You've won the state art scholarship, Muttonhead," she hissed. "But I didn't apply for anything. I would never have allowed it earned." "Well, someone did on your behalf and you've won, so get up there, dummy." With a sigh, he clambered up and walked to accepted the certificate and envelope from the principal. "Miss Sylvester sent in your assignment," Hiccup Johann said to him in a low voice as he handed the award over. "She feels you are the finest artist she's worked with here." "Well done." Hiccup smiled and shook his hand. Wow, thanks," he murmured. "And I am certain your father will be thrilled to see it." Johann grinned as both Stoic and Gobber roared in excitement. Hiccup almost face-palmed. Yeah, sorry about that, but really, they are ancient Viking culture in two rather huge packages," he said awkwardly. Johann patted him on the shoulder. "I'm glad you have your family here," he said, fully aware of Hiccup's issues throughout the year. "Off you go." He arrived back at his seat almost in a daze as Astrid smiled, gently touched his hand as she rose to give her speech. Hiccup again found himself concentrating on the beautiful young woman standing at the lectern, thanking Odin and Thor that she was his girlfriend, officially making him the luckiest man on Midgard. "All of us wear masks," Astrid said as she began her speech. "We try to appear happy when we are feeling down, confident when we are uncertain, brave when we are scared. But high school is a peculiar environment where masks are more difficult to lower than usual, and who you are, who you like and who you don't can come to define you. Where being popular becomes more important than being decent, where being seen in the right place is more important than doing the right thing. Where the illusion is more important than reality. In our year, we wore our masks and around us, darker things were happening. Our principal was abusive, victimizing his stepson under our noses, and we missed it because we saw the mask and not the reality. We were all to blame by accepting what we wanted to see, not what was there. And before us, a student was isolated, abused, and ultimately, almost lost his life. The boys who harmed him have been put away, but could they have been stopped before they attempted murder? Probably, if we had stood up and tried. I wore a mask, Miss Perfect, the class president. I am not perfect, far from it. But a person I had treated harshly, who I had underestimated and ignored because he was beneath my notice and not part of my crowd, saved me, helped me, and protected me. And thank Odin I saw beyond his mask when he called for help. Helping him gave me someone whose friendship and love I value most highly. She smiled and Hiccup blushed. Her parents shared a look of pride at her speech. You can all do amazing things, she said to her fellow students. But be yourself. Take off that mask and be who you really are. And if you are not liked and accepted by your friends for that, then they are no friends and you need to find better ones. Because life behind a mask will cut you off from what matters most, and maybe, the people who will make your life truly perfect. She smiled. Congratulations senior class, we did it. There was a blizzard of caps being thrown in the air and Astrid tossed hers aside happily, watching it spinning through the air and hitting Mr. Mildew. The students rose, cheering to the speech and at the end of the ceremony, and Astrid grinned and sped down the steps, to find Hiccup. She nodded and smiled in acknowledgement at the congratulations of her friends for her speech, but her eyes were locked on the tall, auburn-haired, emerald-eyed boy who was smiling and waiting for her. She flung herself against him and he wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off the ground and swinging her around a couple of times before gently setting her down. It was all for you, she said breathlessly as he gently swiped the bangs off from over her left eye. So I make your life perfect? He asked her huskily. She grinned. Well, I did exaggerate for the speech, but, yeah, pretty much. She laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck. You make mine tolerable. He told her, grinning. Tolerable? She asked tartly. Adequate. Adequate. Oh, you are so dead. She growled as he leaned forward and silenced her with a deep kiss. When they broken apart, Miss Sylvester was standing by them and Hiccup blushed and pulled back from his girlfriend, incredibly flustered. Miss Sylvester, he gabbled. I never even know you, I mean I. He paused and tried to compose himself. Thanks, he hazarded. She smiled. Really, you are welcome, she told him. You have a rare talent, Hiccup, and I could tell you had real issues. Some of your solo works were very dark but incredibly moving, so you deserved recognition. I sent in your project work since it was solely your artistic input in that piece. He rubbed the back of his neck self-consciously as Miss Sylvester smiled and turned to Astrid. Your image will hang in the gallery in the state capitol, Miss Horferson. She stared and gaped, and then she smiled. I could get used to that, she admitted as her parents and Gobber and Stoic came up. Ingrid and Martin hugged Astrid tightly, and then did the same to Hiccup. He smiled a little self-consciously and then fist-bumped Gobber. Thanks, old man, he grinned. I don't think I'd have done it without you, or you, Mr. and Mrs. H. We couldn't have been prouder, Hiccup, Martin told him firmly. You proved me wrong. You were a decent, hard-working young man. I am proud is going out with my daughter. And the awkwardness continues, Hiccup murmured at Astrid. She giggled. Hey, you have the seal of approval from my father, she sniggered. Well, that fills me with confidence. He sighed, as Stoic grabbed him and hugged him fiercely. Dad, still need air. Hiccup groaned. Apologetically, Stoic stood back, but he was beaming ear to ear and his face was very proud. Slowly, the others in the gang coalesced around them, all grinning in glee as Hiccup high-fived them and Astrid hugged her girlfriends. What now, milady? Hiccup asked, an arm gently draping round her waist. She returned the favor and grinned. Now we celebrate, she announced. High school is done. Chapter 99, No Masks. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Summer had been great, the release from school allowing everyone to finally relax. Hiccup had split his time between settling his dad in a new home, working with Gobber and spending his time with Astrid, which was the high point of every day. Stoic had been assessed by doctors and psychiatrists and they had determined that he had partial memory loss from the head injury he had sustained in the crash 5 years earlier, and though he had recalled who his son was, he had lost a lot of the drive and initiative that had characterized his former personality. He got on well with Gobber, reminiscing, drinking and visiting various old haunts, but the verdict had been that he would never be really able to resume his role as CEO of Dragon's Edge Travel. He was able to live in the neat house that Hiccup bought him, and Gobber had moved in to be with his friend, much to the amusement and despair of Hiccup when he visited, finding the place decorated in Viking colors with beer cans all over the floor and a fridge stocked with slabs of meat and ale and mead. Hiccup's housewarming present had been a painting of younger Hiccup and his parents, the same image he gave his mother at Thanksgiving, which had pride of place over the fireplace, and his eyes always lingered on the images of the little family. It was definitely his finest work, no matter what the statewide scholarship committee had said. But after he tripped over a beer can, he rolled his eyes, had admitted defeat over the house. His dad was home and his own man. He had to respect his choices. Hiccup remained with the Horfusons, because he didn't really want to leave Astrid, and he would be moving out anyway when he left for Archipelago University in the fall. A huge part of him never wanted to move away from the haven of safety he had found, but he knew he would need to move on, and Astrid, who was also going to Archipelago U with him, was moving with him. She was working in the Mead Hall restaurant as a waitress a couple of evenings a week, despite Martin's initial objections, because both Astrid and Hiccup had argued that real-world work experience was invaluable for Astrid, both as a means of earning money and as a way of exerting her independence. In the last couple of weeks, Hiccup surprised Astrid and booked them into the Ravens Point Lodges, a series of individual chalet cottages in the secluded holiday park west of Burke. Astonished and delighted, Astrid had accepted, and they had spent the days together, walking, swimming, playing ping pong or sketching. Astrid had gone jogging and Hiccup had gamely followed, though she had easily outpaced him, but he had astonished her when they were swimming, for he was lithe, skilled and very fast. But swimming was almost the only time she saw him near naked. His lean shape was lightly muscled, but he was horribly conscious of his scars, especially over his back and arms. Astrid was a good swimmer as well, and they played in the water for hours, splashing, floating or cuddling. One night, just before the end of their break and after a very heated make-out session, Hiccup had pulled back from a very grasping and eager Astrid, knowing there was a real risk he wouldn't stop. Astrid lay back, breathing hard, her azure eyes dark with desire. "Babe," she whined, "please." He sat back, breathing hard and staring at her beautiful face. He knew he was flushed bright red and really wanted to continue, but he actually loved Astrid, and sometimes, that meant saying no. "Milady, I think we both need to slow down," he said, breathing hard. "Oh, we're both 18 and graduated," she whined, staring up at him longingly. "We're old enough to drive and join the army. Please, babe, make love to me." He caught her grasping hands and kissed them tenderly. "You know, if we actually do make love, I will have to drive away and join the army to evade your father with a hunting rifle and mine with an axe," he told her with admirable sarcasm. She stared into his caring emerald eyes and huffed, slowly sitting up. "Why is it the bad boy is the voice of reason, but Miss Perfect is the one wanting to misbehave?" she sighed, running her fingers through her disheveled golden hair. He smirked and kissed her tenderly on the lips. "I'll give you a clue," he murmured. "I'm not as much of a bad boy as advertised. And I love you too much to ruin your life. Gods, I have ruined pretty much everything else in my life. So we need to wait until we're ready." Astrid sighed and leaned against him. "I know, babe," she sighed, "but I just really love you." He sighed and rose, getting them a drink and leading her out onto the balcony, overlooking the Ravens Point cliffs. "Sit with me," he murmured, his lopsided smile sending a thrill through her chest. The day had been hot, but there was a slight breeze and the temperature was dropping a little as the evening progressed. The sun was gleaming over the sea as it dipped lower in the west. Hiccup smiled, his face more freckled than usual and lightly sun-kissed, his dark auburn hair tousled with a couple of small braids behind his right ear that Astrid had put in. He was relaxed in knee-length red and forest green tartan swimming shorts with a deep red t-shirt, while Astrid was sitting in an azure bikini with a cobalt blue sarong wound around her waist. She smiled as well as she sat beside him on the wicker love seat. You know, this is perfect, she admitted. I really never imagined this when I thought about what I was doing after school. Me neither, because I knew what would happen, he told her gently. The day I graduated, I was going to be out on the streets, thrown out by Alvin, but it all happened so much sooner, and my life changed so much those 2 days I was homeless. He sighed. But it brought me to you. Thank the gods my father insisted I did art, she sighed. If he hadn't. They both fell silent, knowing the end would have been the tragedy that Hiccup just avoided. You know I love you, he told her, and she gave a soft smile, her eyes softening at the words. He never hesitated to say them, never took them for granted, and she knew he only ever said what he meant. She nodded. I love you too, she sighed. And I actually don't want anyone else. You're not perfect, but you are smart and brave and caring and so damned hot. He gave a self-conscious smile. While you are the brilliant, beautiful and ferocious Astrid Horferson, he said in wonder. And I cannot believe that you are my girlfriend. Gods, I have bruises from where I have to pinch myself to check I'm not dreaming. I can always punch you. She offered with a grin. What is it with you and violence, milady? He asked seriously. She pecked a kiss on his cheek. Oh, I have to keep my men in line, she said smugly. A flash of uncertainty flickered in his emerald gaze and he looked worried. Men. Plural. Oh gods, she's about to. He said in a panicked voice, only half joking. You are more than man enough for me now, and always, she purred, nuzzling against him, and he wrapped an arm around her, pressing his lips to her forehead and relaxing a little. Thank Thor, he sighed. Because I wanted to give you something and it wouldn't really have worked if you were about to dump me. She punched his shoulder hard and he yelped, but his emerald eyes were twinkling with humor. You are never getting away from me, she told him firmly. Okay, scary stalker girlfriend on the loose again. He said with a grin, then fished in his pocket and pulled out a small box. Her azure eyes widened. Babe, she asked in a shaky voice. He turned to face her and dropped to a knee. Astrid, you are the most amazing and beautiful person I know, he said sincerely. You hid it behind your mask of being Miss Perfect, but when you let yourself be you, you are the most caring and smart and decisive and wonderful woman. And I know I have a troubled past, I know I have a lot of issues to work past, but I will never love anyone like you, even if I searched for 1,000 years. He opened the box to reveal a ring with an azure blue stone on a white metal band. Mouth opening in a soundless O and eyes growing round, she stared at the ring, then back into his gentle emerald gaze. Of course, I'm never going to be buff or brash, but I will always love you, milady, Astrid. He began. Yes, she murmured. And of course, this isn't a proper engagement because I haven't got the courage up to ask your dad, and I do know he has a hunting rifle because I've seen it, but this is a promise that we will get engaged, that I want to marry you with everything I am and everything I have. He looked deep into her eyes. Will you, milady? She nodded, tears in her eyes. Why yes. She whispered. Gods, yes. She could barely contain herself as he slid the ring onto her hand, then flung herself onto him, kissing him passionately, hands roaming all over him. Breathing hard, she nuzzled against him. Are you sure this isn't some master plan to get me into the sack? She murmured. Not official yet, he mumbled, breathing hard. Still the voice of reason, just. She burst out laughing, kissing him lightly and rising. Come on, lover boy, we need to get showered before we head out for supper. He stared after her as she sashayed back into the chalet and sighed. Thor, what have I gotten myself into? He grinned and scrambled after her. Oh. The leaves were turning and the temperature already dropping when the new year started at Archipelago University. The campus on Dragon Isle was packed with freshmen, milling around, finding their rooms and locating classes. The gang from Burke High were all going, with Heather and Fishlegs, Rough and Tough, Irette, Cammy and Snotlout all registered for courses, along WTH Astrid on her physical therapy course and Hiccup doing mechanical engineering with a minor in art. After settling in, most of the gang headed down to the main canteen for the freshman meet and greet social, meeting other students from their courses as they arrived and grinning in welcome to new friends and old. Snotlout was already bonding with the other football players and flirting with the giggling girls when the doors opened and two final figures entered. One was a tall, lean young man with tousled auburn hair, two small braids sticking out from behind his ear and emerald eyes sparkling with happiness. His lightly freckled face was open and hopeful, his hand twined with that of the beautiful blonde young woman at his side, her bright azure eyes filled with determination. She moved with confidence, the ring on her left hand worn with pride as she snuggled up to the young man with her, a proud smile on her face as the others introduced themselves to the two newcomers. The young man wrapped his arm around her protectively and she smiled contentedly. Hi, she introduced herself when it was her turn, snuggling into his leather jacket. I'm Astrid Horferson and this is my boyfriend Hiccup Haddock. Hiccup gave a wide, lopsided grin, seeing his friends. Hi, he said cheerfully. I'm glad to be here. Really? Because last year I was nobody and nothing with a group of friends who just wanted to cause trouble and almost no home to speak of, and now, because of Astrid, I have the best girlfriend ever, great friends and family and a future with the woman I love. She smiled and gazed up at him. And I am only here because Hiccup made me realize that if I wanted to be happy, I had to be myself and stand up for myself, not simply hide behind the mask of the perfect daughter my parents wanted, she added. I owe him everything. The two sat down by their friends, snuggling together affectionately as the group chatted and caught up with their summers. It was obvious from the way Ruff was checking the mail company on offer and the attentive way Irette and Tuff were talking that the big footballer had finally got the nerve up to have the difficult conversations with both the twins. Astrid knew that Ruff had been hurt and embarrassed initially, and finally philosophical. Who knew I'd be beaten to the man of my dreams by my brother, she had sighed, and then she had brightened up. Still, there are all those dreamy college football players. A gentle kiss from her boyfriend drew Astrid back to the present. Martin had finally accepted that she wanted to try the degree of her choice and had supported her anyway, though she intended to work as well, just in case. Now she was growing up, Astrid wanted to plan her own life, to make her own mistakes, and her own friends. Including one very special auburn-haired guy who was leaning very close to her, his lips curved in a gentle smile. You okay, milady, he murmured. She nodded. I just realized hardly anyone knows me, she said. No pressure, no expectation, no image. He grinned and shook his head slightly. This time, no masks, no pretense, Hiccup said gently. Sarcasm is still allowed, of course, or I may implode, but be yourselves. He nodded at Irette, who was sitting by Tuff, sharing a joke, and Ruff and Cammy, who were eyeing up the other freshmen in the room, looking at the possibilities and comparing notes. Well said, course not loud, said cheerfully, eyes fixed on the keg of beer. Now let's get out there and enjoy this. Hiccup glanced into Astrid's eyes as they rose to go with their friends. You okay, babe, she murmured. You know I'm ridiculously proud, right? Of course, my love, he smiled, taking her hand. Let's go, milady. The future awaits together. The end.